Thousands of Israeli protesters descended back to the streets, protesting the Netanyahu-led coalition government call for renewal of judicial overhaul. Now, this wave of protests was triggered after the Israeli parliament adopted a key clause of the judicial reforms package in first reading. These waves of protests reminded people of the wave of protests that were unprecedented that happened during last year. Let's take a look.
This is how the streets of Israel looked like this week. Highways blocked, streets were taken over, dozens were arrested. And this is how the place looked like earlier this year. The visuals are almost similar. So is the scale of the protests.
I want to save my country from a dictatorship. I think this government has no earnest meaning of reform of the judicial system.
And the anger among the people, because the very cause of the agitation remains the same: the overhaul of Israel's judicial system.
A small step to dictatorship. They're going to ruin, they try to ruin our judicial system by enforcing laws that will demolish our democracy.
The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu-led coalition government launched its judicial overhaul plan in January. The proposed changes includes curbs on the Supreme Court's powers. At the same time, it gave the government decisive powers over the judiciary. The reform plans triggered weeks of sustained massive protests. They also alarmed Israel's Western allies. By late March, Netanyahu had suspended the push for overhaul and allowed for talks with the opposition parties. But 3 months later, the talks fell through, and Netanyahu relaunched his push for judicial overhaul. Although some of the originally proposed clauses were dropped in the new package, one of the clauses dropped would have allowed the parliament to override a court ruling. The coalition government is moving ahead with other parts of the reforms. This week, Israel's parliament adopted a key clause of the package, triggering the latest wave of protests.
Here are the results of the vote: 64 in favor, 56 against. I approve that the draft basic law, the judiciary, is justified. It will be accepted and will be forwarded to Constitutional Committee Law and Justice.
The latest parliamentary vote aims to scrap the reasonableness clause. The amendment would limit the Supreme Court's ability to void decisions made by the government. The courts could no longer strike down decisions taken by government officials by deeming them unreasonable. Proponents say this would allow more effective governance, while still leaving the court with other standards of judicial review, like proportionality. But critics say that without constitutionally based checks and balances, this would open the door to corruption and abuses of power. Many in the ruling coalition see Israel's judiciary as left-leaning, elitist and too interventionist in the political sphere. They also accuse the judiciary of putting minority rights before national interests and assuming authority that should only be in the hands of elected officials.
Even after the amendment, court independence and civil rights in Israel will not be harmed in any way. The court will continue to oversee the legality of government action and appointments. The government and the ministers will not be able to act with ulterior motives, act with conflict of interests, or make unqualified appointments.
But many in Israel are not buying the government's arguments. They believe the reforms will put Israel's democracy in danger. Critics say Netanyahu and his hard-right government will curb judicial independence. With serious diplomatic and economic fallout, allies like the United States have also urged Netanyahu to seek broad agreement on judicial reforms and to keep the judiciary independent. US President Joe Biden says he hopes Netanyahu would continue to move towards moderation.